Alright, so the next step in our series on the microphone portion of Animating Creation is to work on the bass. So again, the plan for the bass was to actually have it start from the bottom and slowly flip up as little cards. Well, not even slowly, but quickly flip up as little cards until you got to the top. So we're going to do this much like we did the other piece, in that we're going to first cut the model up and then we're going to animate it in reverse, flipping down. So to do this, first I'm just going to assess cutting this thing up, and I'm not going to do a whole lot of this because it's a fairly straightforward process, just takes a little bit of time. This is one of those things I don't really feel you can do automatically in this case, because I want to control kind of where the pieces are. So if we look at the model itself in wireframe, you can see that I don't have very straight divisions everywhere, and this is because it was created with these curves and then turbo smooth to get me the ultimate shape. So obviously I don't have these nice lines that I can just cut across. So one of the things you can do very simply, I'm just going to collapse this all. There we go. Is you can go through and just start to basically slice it up. So let's actually make this an editable poly. So we've got our modeling tools to work with. And once you've done that, now we can go through and do things like a quick slice, and you can slice it across. Now in this case, actually what I do need to do first is select some polygons, so let's just select a bunch right around here, and again pick on my quick slice, and let's say we wanted to slice it right there. So now I have a clean line that I can start to separate out the object from. And of course you can see here it's sliced across both sides, so I have an equal piece on either side. And if I turn off quick slice now, I can go through and start to pick right across that line. And chances are you're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup, like so. So you're going to want to look fairly closely at the edge. I'm not worried about it too much here, but you can see that there's going to be a few pieces that aren't quite right. So you're just going to want to go across and make sure you make them right, like so. And once you've done that, now you can go along and simply detach this from your object and pick on that object. And I'll do, if I was cutting all this up, I do all the cutting first and then go back into my hierarchy panel and start to adjust the pivots. Now I'm just going to pop over to a version of this that has already got everything all sliced up, and then we'll move on. Alright, so here we have a version that I've already cut up the model for. So if I just go back to wireframe, you can see where I've done some slicing to get all my various components. And even if I go to the back here, I've broken it up into a few different pieces. And you'll also notice I've gone through and put the pivot points at the base. Now one of the things you want to keep in mind now is how you want this object to flip. Now obviously there's a lot of pieces here, so my first thing is to try and avoid doing it by hand. I mean, doing this by hand wouldn't be that bad. It's more the fact of having to redo it, which chances are with this animation I'm going to have to redo it a few times to try and get the feel that I want. I'm not going to expect I'm going to nail it on the first time with all my timings and everything else. So really I'm ultimately going to want to write a script that goes through and animates all the flipping for me. But before I do that, if I'm going to deal with a script, then I have to set up the pivot points of this object so the script can deal with them all the same. So I have to define how I want these objects to rotate, what axis do I want them to flip on, things like that, and make sure I set them all correctly so they flip in the right direction. So in this case, in order to do that, the first thing you have to know is chances are you're in 3ds Max in a view coordinate system. So basically this is now more related to the view in your viewport than the actual object itself. You can see that no matter what one I pick, the actual orientation of the pivot axis is the same, which isn't actually the axis of the object. So what I want to do is go into local, and now I can see the axis of each individual local object as I slide along. So what I made my decision to do was make sure that I always pivot the object on the x-axis, and it's always going to be, and just kind of to keep it straight in my mind as I was placing my pivots, the z-axis should always be pointing up away from the edge that I'm pivoting on, and it'll always pivot towards the y-axis line. So it's always going to pivot on x, positive z will be up, and it's always going to rotate towards positive y. That's kind of the way I've set it up. So now if you look at each of these things, that's exactly what I've done, is just set up x to be along the axis, z up, y out. And if I go and spin over to the other side, you can see I've done the same thing and put it this direction, because I want everything to kind of flipping into itself, not out. Always flipping in. That was the way I decided I wanted to do this. So I just went through and set all the pivots for those. This again is a fairly manual process, just because I couldn't think of any easy way to automate that kind of process and get what I wanted. But I figure once you've done it, you're not really going to be doing that one again too often. Once I've done that, then I had to link all the pieces together, because I actually want them to kind of fold in, and just keep folding down to disappear. So if I actually look here, you can see, for instance, if I grab this object here, everything above it is linked. So all I did really was just grab my link tool and did this. And work my way around. The place you have to think a little bit about is when you get to the middle here. How do you want things to go? So I wanted this to fold into the middle, and I wanted this to fold into the middle, and then I wanted this to fold down, this to fold in, and this to fold in. And then this, let's say we have it fold off to this side, and continue down, whereas this one folds off to this side, and continues down like so. So basically setting up two chains that flow down the overall model. Once you've done that, I'm just going to open up my original file here. Now we're ready to start figuring out how to flip things. So the best way to do this is with a quick test. Now, realistically, I actually did this test already in another scene before I ever got to cutting the model, but just to show you my basic process, it was pretty straightforward. I actually went in and just created a box, move, like so, and I just made a few copies, and then go through and link like that. So this is going to be my test scene to work with. So now that we've got that, now we can start getting into scripting. Okay, so we want to start scripting, so I'm just going to open up the script editor. I've got a blank script here we can start working with, so we'll just slide this over. Now, before I get into this, let me just explain kind of my background here. Is I am about as far into the world of layman programming as you can possibly get. My entire programming background was learning to code a bit in Commodore Basic back when I was in high school, and a very small amount of Pascal in a class, I think in grade 10. That's pretty much my entire background in programming. I have never been big into it. So basically I'm a hack when it comes to scripting. And I say this because I want to give people the impression that, you know, maxscript is not particularly hard, and it is incredibly powerful. And if you actually look out at the kind of top 3S Max artists out there, the vast majority of them are scripters in some way, shape, or form. I don't really think you can truly rise to the top as a 3S Max artist without getting at least passable abilities inside of maxscript. So with that said, we're going to dive in, and I'll show you very simple scripting that I use to do this flip. Now, again, because I'm a bit of a hack when it comes to maxscript, usually I don't even bother building a UI for my scripts, because UI just takes more lines of code that I don't have the time to bother with. So I will just build my script and mark the variables in it that I need to change if I ever need to change them. So first thing we're going to start off with is a line of code that you will find you use all the time when you're using scripts to just aid in the process of dealing with lots of objects, and that's a for loop. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to type in for a in selection do. So all this is basically saying is selection is a defined variable that is based on whatever I've selected in the viewport. So if I select these objects, I've now created an array of these 4 objects. So in that array is, you know, selection.1 is this object, selection.2 is this object, selection.3 is this object, selection.4 is that object. Now the key is the array will be ordered based on how you select. So if I do this, for instance, now when it runs through the selection, it'll go to this object first, then this object, then this object, and this object. We don't really want that. So what I'm going to do is just very purposely select them in a very specific order that I want to be able to fold these things down in later. If I wanted to, I could get more complicated and actually have it look at the hierarchy and figure the order they're in and do that. But I really actually want fairly explicit control when I'm doing the animation later. So I didn't. So for A in selection, do. And once you've done that, you put a little bracket in here which will tell the system that there is a loop that it's working within, and that defines kind of the space you're in. So I did a opening bracket and a closing bracket and just left a little room. So the first thing you want to do is, if you remember from our microphone piece, visibility tracks don't normally exist on objects by default. So I'm just going to make sure I turn a visibility track on. So I'm just going to say a.visibility, visibility dot equals Bezier float, like so. So that is basically just saying for A in selection, so in this particular loop, whichever object we're currently picking, the visibility track now equals Bezier float, which essentially turns on that track. So if I just left it as this, it would go through this object first, put on a visibility track, then loop around, do that object, then loop around, do this object, all the way down until it hit the end of the selection. Now I want to make sure the visibility controller is set to 1 so that everything is visible initially. So a.visibility.controller equals dot value, I should say. Dot value equals 1.0. So again, now I'm just saying, okay, we've told visibility to have a controller called Bezier float. Now I'm telling visibility's controller, which is Bezier float, to have a value equal to 1. So now that means all the objects will be visible when it finishes its run. Now we get a little more interesting. One of the easiest ways I could think of to script this was to script it in the same way I would have animated it myself, which is first to turn on animate, grab the top object, rotate it down, set a keyframe on visibility, move down to the next object, move the time slide over, and just continue doing over and over and over again. Continue doing that over and over again. So in this case, what we're going to do to recreate that effect is say with animate on, and now I'm creating a new loop inside. I'm going to say a.visibility.controller.value equals 1.0. So now what I'm doing, because as I loop forward, I'm going to be stepping forward in time, I want to set a lock key on the visibility track so I know that no matter where in the animation I'm getting around to animating a particular piece, its visibility when it starts animating is still 1. So now we're going to add a new key. So add new key a.rotation controller slider time. So what basically I'm now saying is just add a key to the rotation controller of this object at the current time. Slider time is a variable that just means what is the current time on the slider bar. So we just hit enter on that. And now what I'm going to do is move forward in time. So I'm going to say slider time equals slider time plus 4. And so all I'm doing now is I'm saying move forward 4 frames. And then I'm going to set another key. So, and this one, because I have to be very specific about what axis I'm going to do this in, I'm going to say in coord sys local. So I'm basically in the coordinate system local, much like I have up here. I can actually declare which coordinate system I want to do this in. In coord sys local, rotate A and now I'm basically saying rotate A on Euler angles. You can just kind of take my word for that one if you want. So I'm basically saying I want to rotate it 130 degrees on one axis. So you have your X, Y, Z axes that you can work with here. So I've just picked that. We're going to see what that looks like. And at the same time, I'm now going to say a.visibility.controller, oops, two L's, dot value equals 0.0. So now I've set visibility to be 0 once it's moved forward 4 frames. So basically I have a 4-frame animation where the object will flip down 130 degrees and at the same time it will animate to 0 visibility. So it'll just fade out. Once I've done that, I can say slider time equals slider time plus 1. So now I've just moved the slider time forward 1 more frame, and once you've done that you can close that loop and you're done basically. And we can just get rid of those extras. There we go. So what's basically happening now is I'm saying we have a loop within a loop. In the first loop it's going to say, okay, pick my first object, set its visibility to a Bezier float controller so visibility track exists. Then it's going to set the value of that controller to 1. Now with animate on, inside of this loop it's going to say I want a.visibility.controller.value to equal 1. So again I'm setting another key just in case there isn't one there to make it visible. Then I add a key, which is just a set key. Wherever you are right now, just key that animation, that rotation value. Then I move forward in time 4 frames on the slider time. So I basically physically move the slider 4 frames using script. And then in the local coordinate system, I'm rotating 130 degrees the selected object, and then I'm setting the invisibility controller's value to 0. And then I move forward 1 frame, and then I go all the way back to the loop and start again. So I've now moved a total of 5 frames forward, and I do everything again to the next object. Then I move 5 frames forward, and I do everything again to the next object. So once I've done that, we can now test this, and it's always risky when you just type script kind of on the fly in front of a camera. Chances of it actually working the first time are pretty slim, but we'll give it a try. And there we go, it actually works. So you can now see the effect I've got, and if I turn off wireframe, it'll make it easier to kind of understand what's going on, how I can make things just vanish. So this now becomes the script that I can use on the entire microphone. So we'll slide this over to one side, go look over here, and what I'm going to do is start picking. So we'll say, and I'm picking them in the order that I want them to flip on. I'm going to bring it just to there, and then I'm going to go and say Tools, Evaluate All. Boom. So now, if I cycle back, you can see I'm actually doing it on the wrong axis. That's not the axis I want to do it on. So if I undo, I can easily go back in here and say, okay, don't do it on that axis. Do it on this axis. And again, Tools, Evaluate All. And we can see kind of, and still not really what I'm looking for. Let's try that one more time because I think I just hit the wrong thing. There we go. So in this case, it's good. On the right axis is just flipping the wrong way. So again, I'll just undo the animation and say I want to do it in the negative axis of that. Tools, Evaluate All. There we go. So now if we look, we'll see how it all flips. So once I've done that side, then I go around and I grab this side. And I basically want that one to start just a little off timing with the other, just so they look a little more random. So I'll do that, and I'll say Tools, Evaluate All. And now everything folds down. Once I've got to the end, I'm going to pick a point in time. And now I can go in and say, well, I want to work with this piece here, fold it down into this piece here, and I can fold these in as well. So let's actually do it this way. Let's fold this, this, and this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and basically work my way down something like so. And again, I can just go in here, say I want to evaluate all, and it folds everything bloop, 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 all the way down to that piece. And then I can do this leg as well. Now, a couple things I can do to this script to make it a little more irregular. If you want, you can add a random value to any of this stuff. So for instance, slider time equals slider time plus 4. So we're moving forward 4 frames every time we do the rotation. Well, what I can do is I can actually add an additional value called random. And basically all you do is you say random, and then you say what's the largest number in random and the smallest number in random. So a random number between -1 and 1. And now every time it does that loop, it'll pick 4 plus or minus 1, and it'll just give me a little more offsetting in my animation. So again, very quick and easy script to do. Once you get the idea of using for loops and grabbing controllers, it's extremely simple to do types of animation of this type. So that's the quick look at doing the animation of the object kind of popping itself along. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up one last version of this. So now in this scene you'll see the finished version of the base. So I've got the base object here, and you'll notice that for all the objects built into this, I added a cap holes modifier just to fill in the holes and make them solid. You may have to slice your model a little bit just to define exactly where the caps end up sitting, but it should be pretty straightforward. Now in this case you can see what I've done is now I've used that same trick we used for the microphone cylinder, and I've reversed time so that all the pieces flip up. And then I use that same FFD trick to make that knob appear and kind of pop out. So you can see now if I hit play, everything pops up. And you notice I didn't do anything with the knob on the other side because ultimately I'm never going to see it. It's all going to happen when the cylinder tube is there, so I don't have to worry about it. Once I've done all this stuff, I can go back to my original compilation scene that brought in all the XREFs together and just verify the timings between the various pieces. So I may end up going back and just adjusting the timing of these, and that's pretty simple. I can just grab all the stuff here, grab everything, and I can just slide it around using the range bar that I've got here at the bottom, or just holding on any of the keys. So if we go and we just look at that, we can just take one last look at the finished piece. And again, this is all built out of scene XREFs. So if we go here, and I'll actually just pull this one up so we can see it without any camera animation on it. It folds itself up, knob pops out, cylinder builds itself, and you have your finished animation. So it's that simple, that's straightforward. Doing this without having to worry about a class, I think I did the entire thing in basically a day, figuring it all out and getting it built. It was more the time it took to actually build as a class that I spent a lot more time on. Alright, so the next piece we're going to move on to, when you come back to the next video, we'll be looking at doing more organic growth with the Golden Gate Bridge.